Welcome to the next edition of First Impressions, hosted by myself and my buddy Del Pullen. What we do in this segment is we're going to review the first episode. Thank you. We're going to review the first episode of two TV shows, one contemporary and one classic, and then report back to you on whether or not it was any good. Our two TV shows this week are the Flintstones and the Simpsons. Del Pullen, let's start with the Flintstones. What happens in the first episode of the Flintstones? Didn't it start in black and white?
You know, that, honestly, I watched a colorized version of it, so I cannot tell you if it was in black and white. I can tell you completely separately that the first season of Hogan's Heroes was in black and white, and season 2 on was in color, but I actually did not watch the pilot in black and white for the Flintstones. It was colorized.
Yeah, I think a lot of references I see to the Flintstones being in black and white is because people watch it on black and white TVs more so than it was a black and white show itself.
And all commercials were originally, I don't know if most people know, but the Flintstones were used to sell cigarettes, and a lot of those were black and white. So
producer Sean just sent me a link to that on the break. There was an old Winston commercial, Winston cigarettes, tastes good like a cigarette should. Yeah, and Barney and Fred are out back smoking it up. All right, so how was the first episode? What happens in it? Is there any kind of great exposition, or is it just all set up?
Not really. So the first episode is known as the Flintstone Flyer, and Fred is trying to impress his boss, Mr. Slate, by taking him out on a fishing trip. But Barney and them get caught by their wives, Wilma and Betty. So to cover up, Barney and Fred use a makeshift airplane made out of wood and a bird to kind of cover what they're doing out, from their wives. Fred manages to impress Mr. Slate, and it wraps up with the Rubbles and the Flintstones just sharing a laugh over their adventurous day. So one thing about the Flintstones is, everybody knows based on honeymooners. It was also the first primetime animated sitcom.
Hang on, stop a second. Your phone broke up there. You're saying it was based on the Honeymooners? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Okay. It was based on the Honeymooners. Pal Zoom, Right to the Moon. Hanna-Barbera said it was the best television show on at the time, and they wanted to do something to model it. And one of the ideas that they were pitching around was they always wanted to do something set in the Stone Age. So there you go. They put the two ideas together. And a lot of the jokes from the Flintstones from that very basic concept of modern times in the Stone Age. So they have dishwash, they have vacuum cleaners, but they're made from animals. Their garbage disposal is, a pig, or a wild boar creature. And so it is the hardworking schlub, husband who goes to work every day, housewife woman who stays home. It's I Love Lucy, it's the Honeymooners, it's later like the Simpsons, and just the things he gets into with the wacky neighbor, except animated, set in Stone Age times.
Seeing it as an adult, does this pass as an adult show, or is this a kid show?
It does. Honestly, it does pass as an adult show. Now, where the episode aired originally in 1960 through 1966, so it had just under a year run, and it was a different time, obviously, in the 60s. So that we would consider we might consider a little more infantile now. Would have been a little more on edge, a little more adult back.
But it's totally campy now.
It can be now, and here's the thing: they could easily do a remake of this. In fact, they did. They called it The Simpsons, and they called it The Jetsons. But they absolutely could. If they decided to relaunch the Flintstones now, they could. I mean, they even did a movie of it back in the 90s that was somewhat panned, but very successful and a huge selling soundtrack. And honestly, the show still holds up. It's still very funny. It's still adult content. There's stuff that definitely goes over kids' heads. I can't think of any joke in particular, but there were a few where I was sitting with my daughter, and she looked at me, and I was like, "Don't keep going."
Okay. The important question every man has to answer about the Flintstones is: if you could only have Wilma or Betty, which would you take?
Wilma. I'm thinking it's the redheads. That's for me though. It's the redheads.
That's same here. All right, tell me about the first episode of The Simpsons.
Okay, so the first episode of The Simpsons starts with what was the year? So long ago.
89, 90?
It's in 87 is Schwartz on the Tracy Ullman Show, of course, then started with the actual first pilot, which was made-for-TV special called it was with the Simpsons in 1989. Of course, the show's still running some 762 episodes later. So the first episode starts with Homer. They lose their money for Christmas, right? Marge has to spend it on getting a tattoo removed from Bart. And Homer takes a job as a Santa Claus, a mall, to raise money for the family. He ends up going to a dog track. Him and Bart want to turn it into more money to buy more presents with. They end up losing it all. The dog they bet on is called Santa's Little Helper. The dog ends up losing. The owner of the dog kicks the dog out, and the dog runs up to the Simpsons. And the famous line is, "Oh, he's a loser. Welcome to the Simpsons."
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah, it's super sweet. So the first episode is them getting Santa's Little Helper, and back, when it was originally established, everybody knows it as a silly, goofy, wacky, zany show now. But originally, when they pitched it, and the way it ran, it was a very down-to-earth, realistic family. In fact, more so than something like the Flintstones or the Jetsons were. This was a real look at struggling household, a struggling family, and to make ends meet, and finding the comedy in that. And so there's always been a lot of tender moments in The Simpsons. The first episode is still a classic. I still watch that almost every single Christmas because it's oddly the pilot is a Christmas special. Most shows don't start like that.
All right. Well, this has been today's episode of First Impressions with Del Pullen. Thank you very much for your report, Del.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jay. Appreciate it.